All right, welcome back to the final session of the day. Are you excited? Nice. Okay, what I want you to do is, can you do me a favor? Can you nudge the person next to you, left and right, and say, it's good to sit next to you? Right. So for this final part of the session, I am fortunate that I don't have to do this moderation alone. Because I have a very dear ex-colleague of mine joining on stage. My dear colleague, ex-colleague, Christian Smirnow, he will join me on stage today. I once worked with him very closely when we were both program leads at the HPI D-School, just around the corner there. And when I worked with him, Christian is a very driven person. He's extremely motivated and very passionate about the work he does. And I have to say, I've learned a lot from working with him. And you know what? It's been 3 years since I think Christian left the D-School. And I'm so glad that this conference actually brought us back together so that we can do this final session together, just like the good old days. So please help me welcome Christian. By the way, I love his hair. Yes!
Okay, thank you so much, Jen. And yes, happy to be here now on the main stage as well, after being the host in the other room in the lecture hall space. So thank you. It's a really like a huge throwback for me, you know, coming back here. I've stayed in touch, but I was very humbled and also felt the pleasure to be invited to join here as one of the Masters of Ceremony for the second day of the conference. And when I first met Jens, he had just moved here to Germany from Malaysia for the very first time, right? This was for the job. So he didn't have any experience of Germany and didn't have any experience of working here or being at the HPI. And we had a very kind of deep and under the skin talk and conversation when we first met each other about social impact and about the meaning and the purpose of what we can do when we work with students or when we work with people that we teach. I think one of the new aspects that Jens brought in was definitely a cultural perspective from a part of the world that I myself had not been exposed to at the time, and many of us and many of the students, especially also coming in to the D-School, had never experienced or seen before. That had an immediate impact on how also we frame the way that we interact, the culture we build at the HPI School of Design Thinking and beyond the D-School Design Thinking at the HPI. One of your strongest characteristics, I think, is, first of all, your humility, and I really appreciate that, but also your sense of camaraderie and the way that you can create emotions in others. Like, it's the reverse empathy. I wish I had this type of way of speaking sometimes, but I don't. He has also done a lot of professional things, by the way. If you need someone to to do great stuff for you, ask him. That's me, that's us, that's the setup for the final panel, Design Thinking, the Future.
Exactly. So for the final panel discussion of the day, we have 5 visionaries who have contributed significantly into the world of design thinking. And right now, we have the opportunity to dig into their minds, to hear their thoughts on what the future of design thinking might be.
With that, please, again, it's time for the applause round. Welcome on stage, first of all, Professor Uli Weinberg. Yeah. He's our German design thinking dinosaur. Yes. Also, Claudia Nicolai, the academic director of the HPI School of Design Thinking. Please come on stage. Well, sometimes, you know, we need new titles. We're repeating all the same titles of all the same people.
I was just
over and
wondering
over
what type of
again.
animal you're gonna call me. I was like,
We have George Kembel, who is even more of a dinosaur in design. Let's put it like this than Uli. One of the very, very first originators, of course, of what design thinking and especially the education of design thinking means at the Stanford D-School. And at the time, of course, very much collaborating with David Kelly. Yeah, currently also spearheading dglobal.org. So great to have you here, all of you and more.
Yeah, so we also have Dr. Maria Yang, who will be dialing with us online. Hi, Dr. Maria, thanks for joining us.
it's a bit in the way.
Let's give Dr. Maria a big round of applause. So, Maria is the Associate Dean of Engineering and Gail E. Kendall Professor for Mechanical Engineering at the MIT. At the same time, she is also the Academic Faculty Director for MIT D-Lab, which addresses global poverty through participatory design. So once again, let's welcome Dr. Maria. Last but not least, we have Richard Perez, who is the founding director of Hasso Plattner D-School, Afrika. Maybe a dinosaur from Africa this time.
No.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, so the topic of the panel is design thinking, the future. And I think it doesn't need much more than that to basically start a discourse and a conversation. Uli, as the first person to respond and to kind of open up the frame, share with us your thoughts about the future of design thinking. What is it? What does it mean? Why are we here?
You know what spontaneously comes to my mind now is, I think it was about, we heard the story with Bruce Nussbaum, who wrote the article which inspired Hasso to bring design thinking to SAP. And it was that Bruce Nussbaum, who also, I think it was 10 years ago, who wrote something which was titled, Design Thinking is Dead. It's dead. And there was big discussion in Berlin. There was somehow in a club, it's not at the D-School, but somewhere there was a discussion about design thinking is dead, you know. And it was only he did that to provocatively promote his book, his new book. But we all didn't know that it was just about the book. We all thought, oh shit, if that guy who inspired Hasso Plattner is saying design thinking is dead, it must be true. Design thinking is dead. Well, we didn't believe him, actually. No? Claudia, we didn't believe him.
No, I mean...
We didn't participate in that discussion. Who was participating in that discussion? Sasha, was you? Monica? No. No, there was none of you was participating in that discussion. But who knows about that? It's design thinking. Who read that article?
I did. I met him once at Parsons in New York.
Yeah.
Talking about the book.
And so I think that person would be also interesting here, and the young kid would also be interesting here to talk about the future of design thinking. But I think let's give it a try. As a dinosaur meeting here,
oh my God.
Think about the future. And maybe a try. I was quoted that I was promising that we don't need a D-School in 5 years from now, which is 20 years after the start in Potsdam, which is actually 25 years after you started. You have the 20 years now, George. You can talk about that. And we just discussed that. I'm not really sure if we need that kind of D-School, but I'm pretty sure we need design thinking. And the future of design thinking is nearly everywhere, and it's in the schools, it's in universities, it's in companies, it's in a political arena, and I think we probably don't have to call it always design thinking. That is something I would also ask to discuss. Is that the right term after 20 years? You came up with that. is there maybe a better term, or are there other terms? But I'm pretty sure that the basics of what we were doing, what you started doing, which is really radically questioning the traditional structures of education and business and how we run things, and questioning it, always looking at the people, at the humans, and always trying to find out the best way of coming up with good solutions and solving complex problems, and not just a mediocre way, no, actually the best way to do that, and constantly renewing itself. I think that has an incredible future, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm pretty sure that in 5 years from now, I will not be running the D-School here. That is for sure, you know. That is for sure. So, but the D-School will be a very active place in the university sector in Germany, and it will play a role. So.
All right.
I can take on. I know that he'll never be gone in terms of never do something that's not related to design thinking in the future. So, but let's see. That's maybe a very personal topic. So I'd like to frame it a bit differently for me, because you were asking about the future, and the future is. What's the future? Is future now? It's also kind of a quote, future is now. Is it in 5 years, in 25 years? I think future is volatile. And for me, the question about the future is actually a question about the past. So it's trying to look back where we and I mean me personally, have been 15 years ago, if this period comes into play, and how I understand and also how I try to shape stuff that was already out there. Either as you did it at the D-School in terms of action, and I also see Jan over there, and either as it has practiced already decades before. So we're not talking about like it began 15 years ago. But for me, it's like the time I started to actively engage with that. And for me, therefore, the question about the future, question of the past. So what actually did change? And I think design thinking went through several circles, and I just share with you a few that are meaningful for me. It came from just creativity, innovation, and then impact. So that's for me what I see. Like at the beginning, it was something when it was introduced here, how can we foster, empower people to be creative? And then the reason is why? Why should we be creative? To create something new is innovation. To do something that's also going to be for the greater good in terms of value-based, it's about impact. And this is where I see us now. The other thing I also saw is like when it actually, and for me, the starting point is it has been marketed at a certain point in time. 2001, The Art of Innovation got published, and I think this is where when the term became very prominent, and was really tied to design products and services. All stories at this point in time were about product experiences, where you can really observe how somebody interacts with a glass, with a device. Now we have been moving that into service design, into internal challenges, into business designs, and even strategic change. So the scope of design thinking became already broad. And we have to think about, within this, where the purpose is. So where do we actually actively want to take that? And two more things. It also changed in terms of just looking at the basic principles of teamwork. Like 5 years ago, I mean, if you would have counted how often interdisciplinary teams or cross-functional teams have been mentioned, it was far more than this time. And it also shows that we have been moving on in terms of talking more about agile leadership, shared leadership, and also leading with purpose. So for me, that's one thing I wanted to underline. Plus, also, the last 5 years for me was also a very disruptive time. Design thinking, in terms of how it has been practiced, changed due to the pandemic, because all of our schools got closed, including in universities, including the design thinking spaces where we love to have this nice furniture or that lab character. It was taken away. So we really were forced for the first time to really disrupt ourselves and think about whether this type of teamwork, this type of also approach can be transferred into a digital virtual sphere. And if it makes sense to continue to do this hybrid. We practiced a lot, and we're like still here in a very experimental stage. There are some of us saying, back to the analog, it was so great to work together, but we also have been experiencing the digital depth. I mean, a whiteboard is limited in terms of a physical one. A virtual one is actually not even 2D, it's 3D. So we have been adding this other dimension. So therefore the question about the future is where we want it to go, where we want to take it. And therefore, coming back to that one and also tying to yours, I think it's time to also rename it, because now design thinking becomes so much of a term that stands for so many different things, and a few of them I did mention. And I think also making change visible is by changing not your identity, but changing your name, making this accordingly to what you do. So therefore, for me, I don't know what the term is going to be. It's going to be something around D, because it has been so cool in the past. Maybe there's something else in front, maybe an S in terms of standing for strategic, maybe for sustainable, and maybe the T is also, it's at least for us, transferred into something else that's another D, because it has so much to do with doing. I think this is what we empower people to. And this thinking, for me, I know conceptualizing is great and I love that, but actually we want to call people to action for a more sustainable lifestyle. Sorry, that was a bit of a long statement, but yeah, you did ask me a very open-ended question.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah.
But we actually, by finding a new way, we should not end up with HPDDRP.
Only 3 letters, next.
Twist.
Yeah, I've heard that had its 14-year anniversary today, really.
Right.
So we have Maria also here joining digitally. So talking about all hybrid and all future and all the present and all the past. So you are here from the MIT, and I think that is also an interesting perspective that you bring in as a panelist here today that we have not heard of today. So yeah, welcome also digitally. We can all see you on screen behind us and in front of us. So yeah, design thinking, the future, really in the same way. What is your approach, your statement?
To say it's wonderful to be part of the session, to see sort of familiar names and faces from HPI and Stanford. It's wonderful. And I should also say, because I feel like I'm sort of a new person here, for those that I have not met yet, like you, I'm very passionate about design, and I actually study how designers design so that I can sort of understand how to help them design better and more impactfully, to use Claudia's phrase. And I'm also interested in sort of products all the way to large, complex engineering systems. So that's just a little background. And I also had sort of struggled a little bit because I thought, oh, the future of design thinking is such a big topic. And I will say, I will echo what Uli and Claudia said, that, design thinking is here to stay, but maybe the descriptions could be different. It has to evolve possibly. And that it's important for it to continue sort of attacking big, important problems, sustainability, climate change, poverty, right? There's no end. And it's an important tool in the arsenal of how to address these problems in the future, these wicked, interdisciplinary, human-centered problems. The second is, and I hesitate to say this, but I think it's something that sort of has to be said, is the tools that we use to design. And I say this as a mechanical engineer. They're changing pretty rapidly with the rise of AI and machine learning. And, you can get these commercially available generative design tools that used to be terrible, and now they're actually pretty good, and they can come up with these, huge pools of designs of such intricacy and complexity and high performance that no human is capable of. It kind of boggles the mind. And maybe you've also seen those deep learning visualizations that actually, they look plausible as, a graphic representation, right? Some people call it art. I'll let you decide on that one. But it makes me think, well, there are new ways of designing, not just design thinking, but just designing in a broad picture. And so it makes me a little bit in awe and, think about the promise of these tools, and also, a little bit terrified, because I think, where's the humanity in all this, right? Are we are we replacing designers? Are we changing the way we think about empathy, right? Those are very important topics. And I will say I take a little comfort in what Don Norman says, which is we should seek to use technology to enhance humans, not replace them. And I'm doing that in my own research now. We're trying to think about hybrid intelligent modes of design. And then the last little bit I will say is just, is around education. And I'm trying to build a little bit off of what Uli said, which is I'm at an institution that's deeply, profoundly focused on engineering and technology. I went here as an undergrad, and you would not even dream of bringing up the word empathy in an engineering classroom. It just wouldn't happen. But that's changed so much over the past 10 years, I would say. We have human-centered design classes, human-centered degree programs. We have a new human-centered design academy that's launching. And it's really sort of just a huge change. And it has a lot to do with the fact that design thinking is all around us at other institutions. It's in practice, in companies. And it's important. And people see the value of it. We have people in political science that are doing design thinking in our department, or in our school, which is a very unusual thing. Or in biology, they're doing it. So I think above all, we have to sort of make sure that we continue to sort of create, as educators and scholars, to think about how we can educate in an innovative and engaging way so that students of all disciplines can continue to think about design and use it in their practices, whatever they do in the future, so we can sort of make a better world. So that's all I had to share.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, moving on, we'd like to hear from George, maybe. Right, you represent the origins of the HPI and the design thinking in this round. We also like to hear your thoughts. What are your visions about design thinking moving forward?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Great. It's great to be here, and I love this discussion. And how can we predict what the future is? But it's still lovely to try to inquire into that place. For me, I think yes, origins in some sense of helping bring some intentionality and language around this way of working, so others were invited into moving in a designful way than just those who consider themselves to be designful. So I think that the beginnings of the Stanford D-School was an important inflection point. But we even heard in some of the research panel that these things that we are experiencing now have very deep roots. You can point back to the 50s and the 60s, but I think you can point way before that. For me, one of the things that I think about when I see what we now call design thinking come to life is it's the way we do things. And more specifically, it's the natural way to do things. And somehow, I think in the industrial era, we allowed ourselves to sever ourselves from the natural way of being and the natural way of organizing and the natural way of creating. And that had its reasons. Like we were trying to bring different types of technologies and try to, what does scale mean? How do we reach global scale? And the only way that we could do that was kind of bend ourselves to the technology because it wasn't quite malleable enough. And the only way we could reach global scale and distribute something like a Coca-Cola to the far reaches is to organize things in a hierarchical way. And that we sort of moved into the left side of our brain. And so I wouldn't want to say that was all bad. In some sense, that's what it took for us to put people on the moon and carry computers in our pockets and experience the kind of life that we have now, which is quite magical. But if you actually look inside, you can feel that it's pushed us out of our center. And you can see that everywhere in the kids, from mental health to the health in our bodies, to the health of our spirits, to the health of our cultures, to the health of our global ecosystem and the environment. And I think we're all starting to wake up that that's not okay. And so when I experience someone encounter design thinking, it wakes their whole person up. They recognize themselves in it. They're like, oh, this is how it feels to move in a full way. I'm not just stuck in the left side of my brain. I can use my emotional intelligence and my physical intelligence, and I can include other people who are very diverse thinkers than me, and that's actually needed. Like if you look at any ecosystem that's healthy in the natural world, it's radically diverse. And so I think for me, it's a kind of return to a very old way And I think we have to think much longer than 30-year. I think our culture tends to think in 30-year cycles. I think we have to think in tens of thousands of years of cycles. And so when I think about the future of design thinking, or whatever we call it, and I have a thought on the future of the labeling of that, is anything that allows us to return back to the most natural way of being. And so a lot of the history of design thinking has been to start to formulate the methods and the practices and the habits of minds and the physical spaces that support that. I would call that kind of the middle layer. But as you move in that way, you start to I would say some of the new territory we have to get to is, as I mentioned, it wakes up deep parts of you. You recognize you have dimensionality that's much more than your analytical intelligence. And what does it look like to start to inhabit your fullness? So I think one huge area will require us to go deep within ourselves. And the word contemplative practices didn't used to be talked about long ago. Now we talk about that. So you'll start to see an intersection of what we'll be invited into our interior lives. And what does it mean to know ourselves deeply? What does it mean to stand in our fullness? And we all have radical differences. And that's when it starts to get magical, is when someone can really inhabit that. And then your craft will change. We might start with a kind of common formulation of design thinking that has 7 steps, but you have to move past that. And that only place to move past that is from a very deep place of who you are. And then you become like a master artist of something that only you can do. So that's one, is what is it like to inhabit your interior fullness? And what does it mean for you to stand in your most natural way? And you can tell in your way of life when you're out of alignment with yourself or not. So that's one deep interior sense of awareness. The second, I think, is how we organize ourselves. Most of the ways we organize companies, again, was to sort of move to global scale, but it forced us to bend our humanity into these organizational structures that don't really feel good. Like they're hierarchical, power is consolidated, and so all the political dynamics and team dynamics and the overemphasis on just profit, all those things push us out of a healthy way of being. And so I think the second area will be to reshape the way we collectively organize to move like living systems as opposed to industrial ones. And you know what that feels like. But, colonies of ants and schools of fish, they move in an adaptive, resilient way, but they will challenge our notions of what leadership means and what hierarchy means and what adaptability means and what growth means and growth at all costs means. So we'll have to recast all of that as well. And these will all require designful ways of being. And all these methods will be pointed towards those challenges. And I would say the third area that I think is, and we're getting hints of that both in what was just said, and James talked about this earlier around AI, is we have, I agree that we need human-centered AI. We have to approach AI in a human-centered way, but I would add to that, and I would suggest we have to create synthetic intelligences that have creative capacities in themselves, like creative AI. And in our attempt to try to model what creativity is, we will learn about creativity. And what is a creative capacity? What is a synthetic synthesis capacity? What is a synthetic generative capacity? Most of our algorithms are convergent in nature, and because we assume intelligence is analytical in nature, so we have a lot of analytical thinkers. This is oversimplified, it's not fair. But we have a lot of analytical thinkers developing analytical intelligences and wondering why we're not getting the breakthroughs in AI. I think we have to diversify our sense of intelligences. We have to model more diverse intelligences. We have to bring more diverse authors to the table than just analytical thinkers. And my hunch is that will simultaneously break open the field, but will also force us to rethink our understanding of creativity. And the things we learn in modeling that will change our views of education, it will change how we think about kids, it will change our collaborative partnerships. We will then be able to partner with these synthetic creative intelligences. They will be able to work with us in a more human way. So for me, it's the natural way of doing things. And it'll change our interior life, how we organize, and the way we think of technology. And that's can we predict where that'll go? No. It'll require us to be improvisational in our deepest way as a human species. That's what design is. But I think it's going to lead to a beautiful, flourishing future if we can step that way.
We love it. I can really imagine that future to be like, because when you talk about it, I resonate to a certain degree. Like I grew up in a country where education is industrialized, right? One teacher per classroom, 60 students, and and it's one size fits all. And I grew up in that kind of environment. I struggled to find my place, my inner self. And when you talk about it, I just had goosebumps, because when I went through my first design thinking program in Malaysia, in D-School Malaysia, and that's where I rediscovered myself. You know, I see that even though I may not fit the right mold that the school has been telling me to be, I still am able to contribute in that creative process. And eventually I found that self-efficacy that I never had that when I was in school. And I see that coming from you, so really thank you, and I really hope that one day humanity will reach that point, that all of us will feel that way, and to rediscover our inner self and inner strength as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think we've done a very kind of wide sweeping swipe also on a very, let's say, abstract and conceptual level, but I do think that especially our speaker over there, Richard, can also talk about maybe a shorter term type of future of design thinking. That
I was just listening to George. I was thinking, okay, how do I feed into?
Yeah.
But we need that. You know? I think that's part of. You know, there's no data from the future, so we've got to dream. And I mean, if I look back on the last sort of 20 years, you know. So the need for design is always going to be there. It has been there thousands of years. It's going to be there for the next thousands of years. So there's always going to be a need for this way of thinking and doing. But things will change. Technology is going to influence that, how we do it. But I think the really exciting part of this, the existence of this concept of a D-School, has been this sort of democratization of design. Like now, we're giving the license for everybody to be able to think like a designer. You don't have to have gone to an art and design college and gone through a certain education. We can all think like that. I think the challenge is going to be how we provide the guardrails for that, because if everybody's designing and doing stuff, do we need to control it? Do we just let it happen? What are the consequences of letting it happen? So I think the evolution of what we do, and I try not to use the word design thinking, because I agree it needs to emerge. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what your ideas are, but I think it needs to evolve, but we need to allow it to emerge. But it certainly will have a role, because we've made a promise. We haven't made a promise. We've shown everybody that you can think differently. You can unlock that inner creativity that we have as human beings. We've got to work out how to teach that more. We talk about, there was a talk earlier on in the public sector space, and I was thinking, we started off simply saying, well, all you got to do is be human-centered, go and speak to somebody. Well, that was revolutionary, and then we start to talk about where designers move into dealing with more complex challenges and complex environments, and you've got this thing called life-centered design and planet-centered design. And I was thinking, well, okay, we from an education perspective, and from a D-School perspective, we're just still teaching the basics, the 101, how to go and interview a person. When you're starting to talk about planet-centered design and life-centered design, you've got, how do you interview a tree? It's part of and we don't have the tools for that. And that's where, for me, the future sits. We've got to rethink how are we going to do this, and we unlocking all of this in people, but at the same time we're not necessarily giving them the tools or the sort of the guardrails to guide them. It could be wonderful. It could be just everybody's actually democratizes design thinking. They take and they do their own thing. But I think there's a lot of work to be done. It's certainly not over. I don't think it's a tick box. Okay, we've done that. Let's move on to the next thing. It's definitely going to be an evolution, and I'm very excited about it. What we call it, I don't know. Do we need to call it anything? I don't know. But I definitely think it's the need of it and the purpose of it is definitely going to be there way into the future for the next thousands of years, as things change, as our environment changes, our needs change, as we explore the galaxy and all those sorts of things. Yeah.
And I want to build on that, because there has been already this discussion moving on from from user centricity to human centeredness. And for me, the future has to be life centered, either or, even planet-centered, because even though I also believe in we're always going to create as human beings, we always have to think about the impact we're doing. So it's about making really sustainable choices. And of course you can't interview a tree. It's also good that you can't interview a tree because it's something else than a human being. And in order, when we have the tools haven't been labeled with design thinking. We have to find better ways to integrate not only the designerly way of thinking, but also the systems way of thinking in order to be able to tap into those things. Because the toolbox for users, for human beings, is kind of limited. And I think all of us have been exploring those. And we're good at it. We know how to walk the talk. Well, not all of us, and I think this is somehow for me still territory. We also, as D-Schools, as people creating places for other people to grow, have to open up. So it's no longer just open up to engineers. Even though we are the digital engineering faculty, we need people who also help us shape our thoughts and our thinking about digitization. And that, for me, has to do a lot, again, with value. I think with value-based engineering, we're heading already into that direction. So therefore, like what you called the boundaries or like the rails to keep that, we have continuously to build those and also to let others help us to bring something in. And so therefore, I do also kind of still see a future in there, but a different future. So also thinking about whether it's just the engineering part. AI already tells us the boundaries of disciplines are blurring, right? And how can you create a human AI? We don't know it. And if it's good, we don't know. We can answer that maybe from our own value standpoint, but that's a different discussion. So therefore, for me, it's really kind of the point about this life-centeredness. And I also want to make one point, even though I'm also born and raised in a Western culture. For me, it's not only about democratizing, but it's also to acknowledging different local cultural contexts. Diversity and inclusion, for me, became also really as a guiding principle. And I mean, you can only do little things in your own institution. For me, my little thing was, how can I build a team where no longer we're going to speak German in team meetings? How can we bring in diverse people? How can we have now, and I'm really proud that we kind of were able to establish that we have people, of course, also born and raised in this local country and culture, but also from India, from France, from Egypt, Mexico, Colombia. So it's really great, and this is also something where I think we also have to walk the talk and not only talk about interdisciplinarity, we also have to build one, and this has to be, for example, international.
Okay, so I want to interrupt here. Obviously, we're not getting any answers from this panel, but that's also not the purpose.
Still 12 minutes.
No, exactly. That's
12 minutes.
That's also not the purpose of the panel, right? It's really about opening up our minds, inspiring each other. It's a little bit of a brainstorming session as well. And I was wondering, I mean, there must be someone in the audience who has something at the tip of their tongue that they want to throw out to, maybe as a provocation or as a little challenge or as a little, I'm the devil's advocate here, that they want to get into this conversation. Maybe also to ground us more. I don't know what the next step is, but...
Mail in.
Well, I want to follow on Claudia. If we're talking about being life-centered isn't about talking with one person. It's about how they grew up, what the family around, who are your neighbors, who's your teacher. So I've been proposing that we think about community living learning labs. We have a physics lab to do physics and measurement. Why don't we have, for design thinking labs, community living learning labs?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love the idea.
I think there was someone else also raising their hand in front here. Can we get the mic to the red couch? Yes, thank you.
Trees talk. Literally.
I think there's in the the American indigenous native cultures, I heard someone talk, and she grew up in one of the tribes and then went to like a Western school and was a biologist. And she says in the West, we say the word, I learn about a tree, like it's something up here. She says in her culture, you learn from trees. And so they may not be able to use the same empathy methods, but there's a really interesting question, what is it like to be in relationship with? Yeah. So even our language, human-centered, I think is narrow. To me, the entire front half of the process is not human-centered per se, it's can we look at the situation differently? Yep. And when we solve things that have humans involved, we have to take a human-centered approach to look at the situation differently. But there's a lot of domains where, like designing a jet engine, where it's not as obvious, but you have to disrupt the way you see the problem so that you can solve it differently. So that whole, even that notion of expanding past human-centered to recognize there's actually two phases, how can we look at the situation differently, what can we do about it, is the broadest frame. And we've, in some sense, reduced it to just a human-centered problem. I think that's important because we needed empathy to come back into the equation because we had become so analytical. But we have to recognize it's not just that there's an entire field of looking at situation differently. And there's a lot of methods about looking at situations that aren't just about human situations, that are system methods and contextual methods and cultural methods, but they all serve the same purpose of disrupting the way we see the situation. Most of the barriers of innovation are on biases and assumptions, not anything else. So I think there's something really significant about what you guys are talking about here.
Hello. Yes, there. And science has gotten so far that we can actually see the systems around us now. And you said another word, what's very interesting, field. So we're all kind of living in the field. So science and religion, for example, are the same and have been for a long time already. The trees, we can now see that they communicate. It's very clear from a scientific point of view. So we have a lot of these. And then you're talking about maturity, adult maturity. This is the kind of process that I think most design thinkers, and this has kind of become apparent to me during these 2 days. So I haven't been close to this community. It's a very nice deep dive for me. So thank you for this.
Lovely.
Thank you.
So before moving on to the public audience, I also want to make sure that the online audience have a chance to ask a question. I'm just going to pick one for the sake of a conversation here. What biggest challenges does design thinking face in the next 10 years? What are some of the biggest challenges design thinking will face in the next 10 years? Yes, go ahead.
I had something come up. I can say it if you want me to go. I think the risk is to become a religion. And I don't say that to dismiss religions because I think the spiritual, one of the things I wonder if this is just what humans do. We find a truth, like a spiritual truth, then we codify it, and it becomes the rules, and then the religion becomes about the rules as opposed to the truth. And that's the way we share knowledge, is we conceptualize it, and then we mistake the conceptualization for the thing. I think the same thing has happened to design thinking, and beautiful things have happened to design thinking, but the design thinking, the codification isn't the thing. The thing is what it means to move this way in wholeness with each other, and to have an openness to your spirit and to your mind, and to be open to others, and to recognize you don't have the answers, and that's what it's about. And it was really necessary for us to kind of articulate a codification of it, so we have a way to reference it and recognize and disrupt our habits of mind and start to practice something differently. But the risk to me, and we've already encountered it, is the formulation of the codification has become the thing. And then we believe it has to be done one way, and companies get it and they try to optimize it, and they go through the motions, and it's fine. In some ways by going through the motions, it can break you into a new habit of mind. So that's what it's about. But the goal is those things should shed away, and you have to find your own craft. And so for me, one of the things that I know when it's still alive is when it keeps changing. That someone encounters the truth of moving this way, they internalize it, make it their own, and they re-express it in their own way. They have new vocabulary, they do it a slightly different way, it has a different order, and that's done at a human level, at a contextual level, at a cultural level. So for me, I think it's a human risk that we take truth and we codify it. What can we do? How can design help redesign the way we transfer the essence of the truth of something so that it stays in the spirit of it, I think we're going to have to approach it that way.
Responding to that and also to the question, for me, looking where design thinking was starting to really got spread, that was the university, that was the education field, that was what you did with the D-School. There was not, IDEO was doing it, for example. There are some agencies were practicing it. But looking at that, I think the biggest risk is what I would see now, it actually sometimes is happening in the education field, that people are actually taking that set of description which you are describing here and make a master of design thinking out of it and put it into the traditional system and not seeing the revolutionary potential of what you were developing, what here is very close to here, which is really pointing on the weak points of the education system, of the system which is, there is Caro is just disappeared with her baby, because what we are doing with the education system is we are pointing on those little kids here, which are growing up pretty soon. And this is why I'm so impatient that our impact here at the D-School, and also the one at Stanford, was not large enough, not deep enough. We are just seeing that, I'm seeing that literally, that lots of universities are thinking of how we can really bring it into our system and make a master of design thinking. That will be deadly. And then it's dead.
I just want to add quickly one point. For me, it's accessibility. We talked already about democratizing it. So how can we actually enable, and that starts with schools on that level, how can we actually open up these places in terms of, because like what you said, no, with democratizing it, for me it means actually being able to get into, being able to have access. We're like, because we still talk about this like high-level Western, no? We have a great education system. I mean, we don't love it, we hate it, but it's there. And with design thinking, it's kind of adding another layer. So for me, the biggest challenge is really to see how it will impact and grow at other places. So therefore, honestly, yeah, I'm looking forward to celebrate in 5 years again, but definitely not in the global north.
And I'll just quickly add to that as well. I think for me, the danger is losing the simplicity of its purpose.
Yeah.
You know, we so quickly to box things and codify, and then we get lost in the noise. But we've got to stay true to what it is. We've got to keep going back to the roots of what it is that we're trying to do, and that sort of human element that we're really just trying to unlock who we are. And we mustn't lose that. And I think it's a big danger that we do, because there's a lot of noise out there and we're competing and there's labels and there's other things and people are getting confused. So I think that's going to be very important.
Thank you. I would like to also maybe make space for Maria, if you have any thought towards that question as well.
Thank you. I think that maybe just to build on what George mentioned is and I really love what you said, I think is also is to make sure that where it's practice is it doesn't become like a tick box where you say, oh, I've done design thinking, call it a day, and to really make sure people understand it in a deep way and they sort of address their humanity when they do design. So that's all, just a short thing.
Just wow, I've got so much to think about, so much to digest. How many of you are, how many of you are like me? Lots to think about, right? Or what was being said. Again, we are not here to reach a final answer. It's a way to sow a seed into our thought. 1 minute for you. Okay, just one final question. So since you're so persistent with your hands raised.
Microphone is not working. Now it's working. Thank you for the comment about the trees. Some years ago, I read a research where it was about how a forest talks through the roots and the biochemical kind of interactions in that. But that funding didn't got supported. And I think a big advantage of design thinking is that it got funded by many corporations. So you have complex technology, and now we found a way to make solutions for users, now we call them humans, My question is, who will fund this kind of root talking to trees? Maybe some people might call it esoteric thing. Who will be the financiers like Hasso Plattner for this next stage?
Any one of you here would like to fund it? Just kidding.
Like me. No, but I think it's you made an important point, right? It's like this is what I also meant by we are all gifted, right? So this is like we have with these foundations really the capacity to explore, and that already put us, like all of us, in the really luxurious situation that we have been doing lots, and even more than corporate, like non-profit projects. Last panel was about it, like social impact, so social innovation. Where we, would love to see more of that, and that's also where I think we have to become. In German, it's bescheiden. So, like, how can we actually try to make more out of these means? And coming also back with what Richard said, what is kind of the simple way of doing it? The simplest way of doing it, and that's something I'm really looking forward for within the future. Because for me, it's no longer a corporate space that we're in. We are in an educational space, and this is what we have to actually like seed and grow with really limited means in terms of maybe financial funding, but with lots of people who are open to share. And that's also the reason why I would love to tap into so many people, right? So it's not that we think about the number of students, but people who can go out and share their knowledge and apply it to community-based labs, so to the social problems. And I think this is where I personally would like to see the shift. And we all have to work hard for it, but we also love to do it. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Just 1 minute on that. I think of that. Well, in many ways, but two ways. One, capital sometimes can be a problem. Like as an entrepreneur, many times you get too much funding early, you don't have the real pressures to sort through and make the decisions to focus on the things that create great value. You end up doing things that you aren't needed too early. So at one level, to assume that you need capital to start to do something that's value creating, I think is a barrier. Recognize, just follow that deep sense in yourself of what needs to be done, and then you will start to find your way. And you can go a long way without a lot of capital. That's one thing. And the second thing is, I think capital is a commodity. There's so much of it that when we find the right things, capital just flows right in. And so I think of it in two ways. Don't get it too early. Trust that it will come when it's needed. And we don't know who those will be. It'll come in many forms. Some will be self-generating, will generate the capital need. Others, it'll come in from a philanthropic point, and others will be from corporate points, and others will be investing, and some will be from entrepreneurial sectors, public sectors. I trust that it'll come. But the trick will be to not assume that that's the first thing that has to happen. The first thing that has to happen is the clarity of your own internal compass, the ability to see the situation for what it is as opposed to how we think of it in the past, the capacity to challenge and question everything and find the new ways to do them and to act and move in that way. Then it just happens. It just happens.
All right, thank you. Why not let's give the panelists a big round of applause for sharing their insights, sharing their thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we come to almost the end of our 2 days conference. I just want to let you know that this conference is part of the Global Design Thinking Festival that has been happening and will continue to happen until mid of October. Therefore, we would also like to invite you to already block in your calendars, if you haven't done so, to join us on the 12th to 14th of October this year at the D-Con Festival happening in Cape Town.
Yoki!
Yeah!
I want to say that, yes, it's been an inspiring 2 days. And of course, we have had a huge team and a huge, let's say, back end working towards this for months, but also working on site actively, hours and hours and hours. First of all, a big shout out to our partners of this conference, which are SAP, the MSG Group, and System 180. So thank you to them. their contributions were integral to making this happen. So thank you to all our speakers, everyone who's hopefully now in the room who have been speakers today, and all of the visitors. Thank you to all of the people online. I don't know which camera, maybe everyone wants to stand up and look into just any of the cameras and wave. Thank you to the people online that you've also participated and brought in some of the questions, as well as the entire team here on site at the HPI, the AV and technical team, but also the D-School team and beyond. I don't know even how many people were involved, but without them this wouldn't have been possible. It was meticulously planned, I would say, and a very seamless experience. So this is the biggest applause of the day that we should share now.